and 75% of the average South African salary goes towards paying off debt. Now, that's because the high interest rates from last year have taken a toll. This week, the Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago announced that the repo rate would remain unchanged. For more on this, we're joined this hour by CEO of Debt Rescue, Neil Roots. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Neil. Now, why is the Reserve Bank Governor's announcement of the repo rate, holding that repo rate steady, not necessarily good news for consumers?
Good afternoon. Yes, the reason why that is not good news is that we expected much more. To keep it steady is not enough to help consumers in the dire situation that they're finding themselves in. It is very, very important that we bring some form of relief to consumers out there because they are struggling. So what we desperately needed and hoped for was a reduction in the interest rates.
Now, obviously, the governor in his commentary around the inflation outlook indicated that, unfortunately, that won't be happening soon. And I suppose in the meantime, we can talk about how the protracted cycle of steep rates that has taken borrowing costs to their highest level in more than a decade has affected households to the point, Neil, where we're seeing incomes, the bulk of any income that goes into a household being now spent on debt.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. So people are struggling. People have seen or experienced these interest rate increases, and it's put them in a very difficult situation where they couldn't afford to pay their creditors anymore. And unfortunately, also people are uninformed when it comes to the help that they can get with regards to their debt. So we're very fortunate in South Africa to have something called debt counselling in terms of the National Credit Act that can really assist people with their debt, but not everybody is informed enough to know that.
I think the worry here, if it's not the lack of information, Neil, it's the worry or the misconception that if you go for debt counselling or get a consolidation loan or go for debt review, whatever the case may be, your chances in the future to acquire debt or good debt, if you will, are severely hampered. And maybe that's one of the things that people are so fearful of.
Yeah, that's actually not true with regards to debt review, because the reality is that when you find yourself in a situation where you are over indebted and you fall into arrears with your credit providers, they will list you at the credit bureaus as a bad payer, or you can even get judgments against you. Whereas when you apply for debt review, the situation is much different in the sense that you will be able to pay off your debt in an affordable manner without losing your assets. And yes, there will be a flag behind your name at the credit bureaus indicating that you are under debt review. But when you have paid off enough debt to be removed from debt review, that flag will be removed and it will not count against you. It will also show your bona fides and the fact that you acted in the best interest of your credit providers by doing what was necessary and using the help that government offered in order to pay whatever you could afford to pay.
How much have you seen in the terms of a trend where consumers are now turning to distressed debt to keep their heads above water simply because they don't have the extra 3,000 to 4,000 rand more to pay on their mortgages every month over the last 17 months or so? Has that trend going for distressed debt at high interest rates increased?
Yes, we've seen a massive increase in the number of people turning to distressed debt because they feel that that's the only way out is to borrow more money. And unfortunately, the reality is that there are institutions out there that makes this possible for consumers, even if they do find themselves in a situation where they are very unlikely to pay off those loans and that credit. We see that even retailers nowadays give credit to consumers to buy their groceries. So that in itself is, in my opinion, reckless, because if any person uses credit to pay for their essential goods like groceries, then they are by default in a very difficult situation financially.
Yeah, and I suppose with that, it's quite concerning that you raise that, Neil, because then one wonders about the regulatory or oversight environment for these short-term debt service providers, and how easy it's become for anybody to walk into one of their offices and walk out with a loan that they're unlikely to pay off. Do we have a lack of oversight or a regulatory environment that just doesn't keep a close enough eye on them?
Yes, I believe that to some extent that is the case. And the reason for that is because the credit providers usually who do adhere to these rules that are set by legislation and also the National Credit Regulator are the bigger banks giving out loans for vehicle finance and home loans. So you've got secured loans given by the banks, and then usually the banks make sure that they adhere to the strict guidelines when it comes to determining whether a person can afford to pay back that loan or not. But when it comes to unsecured loans, and you work with people who cannot afford vehicle finance or home loans, but only unsecured debt, we find that those credit providers tend to take a little bit more chances in that regard by giving them loans, because they know that those consumers are very unlikely to get legal help, firstly. Secondly, also to get somebody to help them to prove reckless lending on the part of the credit providers. So we see that with unsecured debt, unfortunately, the credit providers take more chances.
They do indeed, and I suppose with the times as tough as they are, it's only going to continue. Neil, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That is the CEO of Debt Rescue, Neil Roots, joining us this afternoon to unpack why the unchanged interest rate is not necessarily good news for households in South Africa. We've got a lot more coming up.